Hi, everyone. Spice World, awesome. I'm so excited to be here. I think last time I was in Austin, I was pregnant, so I have a lot of whiskey to catch up on. Is frosé still a thing? I think I missed the whole frozen rosé thing. Is that? No? I don't know. No one knows. I am also really excited to be here because I get to talk about robots, which is my favorite thing to talk about. I really love robots. I always have. I've somehow managed to create a job for myself where I can play with robots all the time, which is magical and amazing. But I do want to start by pushing back on some of the assumptions that we have about robots. Because, like I mentioned, I was pregnant and I had a baby fairly recently, 22 months ago. But since then, people have been saying to me, Kate, you must find it so interesting to watch your baby's brain develop and compare it to artificial intelligence. I actually don't think that's interesting at all. I'm really biased because I'm a mom and I love my kid and think my kid is the cat's pajamas. But like, even objectively speaking, as a scientist, my kid's brain is probably a kabillion times more interesting than any technology we've ever developed. So that's not why I'm interested in robotics and AI. The reason I'm interested in these technologies is because they're shaping the world that my kid is going to grow up in. And if you ask the media or a lot of the public conversation what that world could look like, it's usually one of two things. You know, the robots are going to take all of our jobs, and or the robots are going to, become artificially super intelligent and destroy the world and kill us all. So I think it's great when people are forward-thinking and trying to anticipate problems before they happen. Don't want to diss that. But I also need people to know that when I first got to tech universities and was able to work with the cutting edge in robotics, I was so excited to see the robots that were really on the forefront. And I quickly discovered that the cutting edge in robotics looked kind of like this. Oops, sorry. How do I make it play? Oh, hang on. I'll get it. There we go. So we're not quite there yet, not quite ready to take over the world and kill us all. I gave this presentation earlier this year, or a similar presentation that had this video in it, and I got a really upset email afterwards because the guy whose team had made this last robot was in the audience, and he was like, our robot doesn't only fall over, here are some videos where it doesn't fall over, and I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, because my point is not to make fun of the roboticists, right? My point is that the public perception of where we are in robotics and where we actually are is sometimes a little bit misaligned. And there's another thing that we do when it comes to robots and AI, which is we're constantly comparing artificial intelligence to human intelligence and robots to people. So if you do a Google image search for AI, for example, you get these images of human brains and human heads and humanoid robots. And, we do this pretty much constantly, whether we're comparing my baby's brain to artificial intelligence, whether it's in the stock images, or whether it's talking about robots and jobs, for example. I feel like we're often talking about robots and jobs as this one-to-one replacement of human to robot, even though sometimes we acknowledge it's a little more complex. But if we talk about robots and jobs for a second, it's a really, really important issue that a lot of people care about, obviously. And a lot of people ask me about it. So for the past few years, I've been talking to experts, labor economists, people who know how to make predictions about what's going to happen in labor markets when we have automation. And a lot of them said, robots are taking a record number of jobs, not just in the US, worldwide. This is a new transformative technology. It's going to automate away most jobs within the next few decades. Okay. Then I talked to more experts, and a bunch of them said exactly the opposite. Robots are not going to take over most jobs. And they said, we've seen this before. We saw the ATM be introduced, and banks didn't start laying off people. What happened when they started having ATMs was they opened more branches, they expanded their teller services, and so it actually allowed for growth. And then there's a third group of experts that say, well, yes, robots are going to take jobs, but also they're going to create jobs because people have to make the robots and maintain them. So after a few years of talking to experts, I have come to the conclusion that everyone is very opinionated about this, but no one knows what they're talking about when it comes to long-term predictions. We just can't, it's tough. So Bill Gates, a few years ago, said something like, and I don't know what he meant by this, it was probably taken out of context. I would love to have a beer with him and know what he was thinking, because I'm sure he's a really smart guy. But he said, maybe we should be taxing robots for taking people's jobs. And that sounds like a good idea if you have a one-to-one replacement of robot to human, but if you're talking about something that's disruptive in a way that Microsoft Office was disruptive, how are you going to tax Microsoft products for taking people's jobs? Because you can't really quantify that. But that's more of the analogy we should be thinking about, because it is complex, it's very industry specific, and we don't have the research right now to be able to make industry specific predictions. There is one thing we do know, however, and that is that artificial intelligence is not like human intelligence. So the robots are already much smarter than us. They can remember everything, they can do math, they can work tirelessly, they can beat us at chess, they can beat us at Go, they can beat us at Jeopardy, they can recognize patterns in data that people wouldn't otherwise find. But on the other hand, we are also smarter than the robots. It used to be if you asked Siri to call you an ambulance, she would literally call you an ambulance. And I'm sure that this has been fixed by now. But if you've tried to have a conversation with Siri or Alexa or any of those voice assistants recently, you know that they're not quite up to snuff when it comes to human communication. And even some of the applications of artificial intelligence that are getting a lot of attention right now because we're able to do some cool things, they're smart in a really specific way. So if you take image recognition, for example, we have trained these systems to look at hundreds and thousands of images and be able to recognize things in images that they haven't seen before. So these researchers took these 5 images on the slide, my slide back there. They took the 5 images above, they showed them to this AI system, and the system can correctly label abaya, which is the garment the woman is wearing, ambulance, bananas, Kit Fox, and volcano. Cool. So they took these pictures, and they changed a few pixels. So the gray area in the middle, you can see the pixels that they changed in the images. And in the below images, those are the doctored images. Now, to the human eye, it's still really clear. We can still make out what is on these pictures very easily. But now the AI system labels them all as bolete, which is a type of mushroom. So there are ways to spoof these systems that just demonstrate that they're smart in ways that are different from our intelligence. For example, can you spoof an autonomous vehicle that is programmed to follow street lines if you draw new street lines with chalk? There are all these ideas, and of course, technology is going to get better. We are going to eliminate some of these problems. But the point is that the type of intelligence we're developing right now is not like our intelligence. It is a different skill set. We are able to feed machines with massive amounts of data. We now have the processing power to do really cool stuff with that data, but that's not how people learn. Okay, my toddler, look, there's a baby here. Oh my gosh, I love this conference. Babies are allowed to come. Okay, so I see a baby crawling around using physics to explore the world and develop intelligence. You know, babies put stuff in their mouth. Watch out for that. Like they learn in a different way than these systems do. And so I think that for now and for a lot of the future that we can see ahead of us, maybe we should be using a different analogy than comparing AI to human intelligence. And I would like to suggest this analogy. I think that, you know, for thousands and thousands of years, we have domesticated and trained and bred animals for work, for weaponry, for companionship. And we still use animals. We use dolphins. So, okay, earlier this year I saw this movie called The Day of the Dolphin from the 70s. Has anyone seen this one? Yes, a couple people. It's not, I can't really recommend it. It's kind of, it's like super sexist, not a great movie. But, okay, so the plot is there's this dolphin trainer who has these really smart dolphins, and the dolphins get kidnapped by this right-wing terrorist organization because they want to assassinate a president with the dolphins. And it was billed as science fiction at the time, which is interesting because the 60s and 70s were right around the time that the United States Navy and the Soviet Navy started marine mammal training programs. Because marine mammals, like dolphins, have really good echolocation systems, much better than machines at the time, almost better than machines today. Dolphins have an echolocation system that's so precise that they can tell the difference between a BB pellet and a kernel of corn from like 50 feet away underwater. And so these navies started training the marine mammals to find, you know, lost underwater equipment, detect mines. They never officially admitted to this, but a bunch of former dolphin trainers claim that they were also training the dolphins to use their really hard beaks to find and beat up foreign divers. So lots of different uses for dolphins, lots of different uses for animals throughout history. And the reason we've partnered with animals is because their skill sets are different from ours. They're complementary to our skill sets. And so when we're thinking about integrating artificial intelligence and robots, we should be thinking about these technologies as a partner in what we're trying to achieve. That's where the potential of the technology is, not in recreating something that we already have. And just a quick example from another part of my world for how this works. So I used to work in intellectual property, and now that I'm working more in AI and robotics, I've heard people come to me and say, hey, why can't we use artificial intelligence to replace patent examiners? Because the problem in the patent system right now is that patent examiners don't have a lot of time and resources, and they have a really tough job. They get all these patent applications, they have to look at an invention and determine whether anyone in the world has ever, you know, come up with this idea before, and it's nearly impossible for them to do their jobs right. And so a lot of bad patents get issued, which has huge economic costs. And so people have been like, well, maybe we can get an AI system to do this, and they can't possibly be as bad as our current examiners. I'm going to get an upset email from a patent examiner in this office, right? Okay, so what I see patent offices doing, though, is much, much better than that. So the Japanese Patent Office and the US Patent Office and some other patent offices are exploring the use of AI not to replace the examiners, but to help the examiners do a better job by surfacing prior art that could be relevant to them, but leaving the expertise of the examiner, leaving the examiner with more time to use their expertise to make a determination. And so it's really using AI to help people do better rather than just replace them. I think that this animal analogy applies more broadly than just in talking about integration of technology in the workplace. If you think about things like responsibility for harm and people throwing up their hands like, oh, how are we going to assign responsibility when an autonomous machine makes a decision that no one could anticipate? I think of, you know, the earliest laws known to humankind that were about what happens if my oxen wander off and gore somebody in the street. We have had to deal with this question. We've dealt with it in a lot of different ways throughout history, but it's not a new question necessarily. And then my favorite part of the analogy is the social aspect. Because if you think about it, throughout history, we've treated most animals like tools and products. And then some animals we've treated with kindness, and we've given a place in society as our companions. I think we're going to start doing that with robots, treating most of them like tools and products, and some of them like companions. And part of the reason I think this is because we already sort of do this. Earlier this year, NASA declared the Opportunity mission over. Opportunity was the Mars rover that roamed the red planet for 15 years, collecting data, sending it back to Earth, operating for way longer than anyone thought it would, and then finally succumbed to a sandstorm. And when NASA declared this mission over, the headlines all read, "NASA declares Mars rover dead, Opportunity Mars rover dies." And people created all these tributes to this robot that they had never met, that they kind of felt connected to. And it reminded me of one of my favorite robot stories of all time, which was this one. I don't know if people remember the hitchhiking robot, Hitchbot, which was created by Canadian researchers. It would ask people to pick it up and put it in their cars and take it with them, and it made its way all the way across the entire country of Canada, just relying purely on the kindness of strangers. And then it wanted to do a road trip through the United States and started on the East Coast and made it as far as Philadelphia, and then it got vandalized beyond repair. Which was interesting. It was interesting to me, not necessarily because of the Philly part, although that is interesting. But it was interesting to me also that this was news. Like, this made international news. And there was this massive outpouring of sympathy and support from people all over the world who were sad about what had happened to this robot. And it just went so far beyond what you would normally see, if someone's property got vandalized. It's clearly a little bit different than that. So what interests me about robots in particular is that people will treat them sort of like they're alive, even though we know that they're just machines. And part of this is because we're influenced by science fiction and pop culture to really want to personify these things. Part of this is probably a novelty effect. No one had ever seen a hitchhiking robot before, so people really got into that narrative. But there's an aspect to our perception of robots that goes a little bit deeper than that. And that is that we have this inherent tendency to anthropomorphize, to project human traits and emotions and behaviors onto non-humans. We do this from a very early age. We do this in order to interpret the world around us and relate to it. And our ability to do this is really pretty strong. So we will project emotions onto animals, for example, that may or may not actually be there. Studies have actually shown that dog owners often get it wrong. They think their dog looks guilty when dogs actually aren't able to experience the sensation of guilt the way we understand it. So in getting it wrong, we know that we do this constantly. We do this constantly to everything around us, not just animals. We will create emotional bonds to things created in the image of something lifelike. We will see faces in random objects. Faces are another interesting one because it's one of the first things that we learn to recognize. One of the first things that a baby learns to recognize and respond to is a face, and it doesn't have to be a real face. It can just be a black and white image on a piece of paper. And another thing that we respond really, really strongly to is movement. So these researchers, Heider and Simmel, did a study in the 40s where they took these very simple shapes and they had them move around the screen in a specific way. And they asked people to watch this video and describe what was happening. And people would ascribe all sorts of emotion and intent to these shapes. They would say, oh, the big triangle is angry and it's beating up the little triangle. And clearly this is a domestic abuse situation. And so they would create all sorts of storytelling, which that's what the researchers were aiming for with the movement. But it is interesting, if you look, it's just rectangles and a circle and two triangles, and yet we are able to interpret the movement in this way. In fact, our brains are so attuned to movement that even if you show people just still images and you have an object or a person or an animal appear or disappear in the image, our brains are much quicker and more accurate at detecting changes in animals or people than we are in changes in objects like a coffee cup or a silo, because we're constantly scanning our environments and trying to separate things into objects or agents, which makes sense evolutionarily because the agents have been the ones we need to watch out for. But where it gets really interesting is when you take the movement of an agent and you put it in an object. So these researchers took a stick, just like, looks almost like a broomstick, very simple. They put it on a base that had motors. So the stick could move, it could do like a figure 8, it could go fast, it could go slow. And they had people spend time alone in the room with the moving stick, and again, later describe what was happening. And out of 30 people, only 2 people described the stick's movement in really technical terms. Everyone else said, oh, the stick was angry, the stick was pensive, the stick was dancing with me. So this is just a stick, and that brings us to robots, because robots are these physical things. We're very physical creatures. We respond differently to something in our space than something on a screen. They're physical things that move in an agent-like way in our space. And people will project onto even the most simple robots. Take the Roomba vacuum cleaner, not the most sophisticated robot out there, just kind of roams around your floor to clean it, but it's moving around on its own, and that will cause people to name the Roomba. Over 80% of Roombas are named. I don't know what the percentage is for your more standard vacuum cleaner, but I guarantee you it's lower. People will feel bad for the Roomba when it gets tangled in the curtains. I was visiting the company that makes the Roomba, iRobot, earlier this year, and they have all these stories of people sending in their Roomba for repair and getting the offer to get a brand new replacement Roomba and turning them down and saying, no, we want you to fix Meryl Sweep and send her back to us. And that's just a Roomba. So a more extreme example is military robots. So research has been done on this, actually. There are these bomb disposal units that were used in Iraq and Afghanistan that the soldiers became very emotionally attached to. They would treat them kind of like pets and give them names and medals of honor. They would do the same thing that the Roomba owners do, which is insist on getting the same one back when it had to be repaired, probably even more so than Roomba owners in this case. And they would have funerals for them with gun salutes when they couldn't be repaired. So pretty intense stories. And these robots don't look very special. They're just sticks on wheels. A lot of these are actually partially remote controlled, so not even fully autonomous, and they're already having this effect. But that brings me to the element of design, because we are seeing increasingly very biologically inspired robotic design that's hard to watch. It's really hard to watch this thing move and not feel like it has some sort of intentionality. I actually think they just today, it says coming soon, but I think you can order them as of today, the Spot robots. Not that I'm, pitching Boston Dynamics or anything, but I do think they're very, very interesting, especially because I don't think that they intend for people to treat the robots like living things. The reason that they do biologically inspired design is because animals have evolved over, billions of years to be really efficient at navigating the environments that they're in. So it makes sense to borrow from that type of, locomotion to build your robots. But there is the field of social robotics that does this very intentionally. So social robots have eyes or faces, or they don't even have to have faces. They can be like R2-D2. All they have to do is mimic cues that people automatically, subconsciously associate with states of mind. And there's a whole body of research in human-robot interaction that shows how well this works. Our recent favorite was a study that showed that it makes people really uncomfortable when you ask them to touch a robot's private parts. So we know from a lot of research that people respond to the cues that these lifelike machines give them, and they respond even if they know perfectly well that they're not real. Okay, so why does this matter? I think this matters because what's happening right now all over the world is that robots are moving from being kind of behind the scenes, in factories, behind cages and walls, into shared spaces, into workplaces, into households, into public areas. And so we have these machines that can sense and think and make autonomous decisions and learn that are now in these spaces, and they're interacting with people. And, you know, the difference between robots and animals, obviously, is that animals are alive and robots are not. And, you know, from working with the cutting edge, I can tell you that it's going to be a very long time before we can build robots that can feel anything. But we feel for them. And that matters because if we're trying to put this technology in shared spaces, we need to understand that people treat it differently than other devices. And so much so that that can have consequences. You know, do we want our soldiers to become emotionally attached to the robots that they work with, or can that be anything from inefficient to dangerous for them to hesitate for even a second to use the device as the tool that it's meant to be? And on the other hand, we're seeing some really, really cool use cases in health and education that specifically rely on people treating the robot like a living thing. And one of the examples there that I find really compelling is the work that's being done with autistic children and social robots, because researchers discovered a while back that children on the spectrum will often engage with social robots in a way that they won't engage with people or other children. And they think that it's because the robot is clearly social, but doesn't come with the baggage of another human. So they're not sure, but that's why they think that this works. But the interesting thing that they found out is that the kids won't just engage with the robot, they will engage more with a caregiver who's in the room with them if they're playing with the robot together. So they'll make more eye contact, they'll answer more questions. So that's pretty interesting. And up until now, that was kind of one-off studies done in the lab, but last year, they published the first long-term study where they put robots in kids' homes. The kids would interact with the robot together with their caregiver for about a half an hour every day. And after a month, they saw huge increases on all of the skills that they were trying to increase through this therapy. So basically replacing thousands and thousands of dollars worth of therapy. And the catch was that it was a study, so they had to remove the robots at the end of it. And when they did a follow-up test with the kids 30 days later, the skills had decreased again. But it shows that there's a ton of potential if we start trying to use this as a tool in therapy. And it's not just a tool that's good for autistic children. The Personal Robots group at the Media Lab at MIT does a lot of work with robots and kids and in education, trying to look at, can robots be used as a tool not to replace teachers, but a tool that teachers can use to help engage children. And not just kids. We had this project, one of the students at the Media Lab called Natalie Freed made this French teaching dragon bot that taught French vocabulary. And I learned so much French from this dragon bot because it's fun to have this fluffy dragon character interact with you. It's not judging your pronunciation. It's more fun than I found it more fun even than Duolingo, which is heavily gamified, just because it's like physical and in your space. So not just for kids. This may seem silly, but when we're talking about technology integration, one of the big challenges that we're facing is that because the robots aren't, taking people's jobs right now, we're seeing more and more that people and robots are going to have to work together in the workplace. And so the challenge is to get people to trust the technology and want to work with it. And so there are little things that, this anthropomorphism research can help with. Like there's a company in Japan that's a manufacturing company. They make these money handling machines. And they have an assembly line, and they have robots, doing some of the things that can be easily automated on the assembly line, but they haven't been able to automate the whole factory, so they have people come in and do some of the work the robots can't do. And the people will come in the mornings, and they'll warm up their arms for their day on this assembly line, and the company will have the robot arms do the exercises with the people so that they're perceived more like colleagues and less as machines. Which is really interesting. And okay, there's probably a cultural difference there in that this is a Japanese company, and it's not clear whether that would really work, in more of a Western. We tend to be a little bit more resistant to treating robots like living things in Western society. But even here, there are tiny little things that can make a huge difference, like giving a robot a name. There was this company that I talked to that makes these hospital delivery robots that are just boxes on wheels that kind of roam the hallways of the hospital and deliver medicine. And they started shipping them with little nameplates, like license plates that had a name on them, like Betsy, because they realized that people are much nicer to the robot when it has a name. Like, instead of this stupid machine doesn't work, it would be like, oh, Betsy made a mistake, let's help her out. So even just tiny things like that, we shouldn't underestimate the power of that. And then my last example from social robotics is this one. This one has been around for quite some time and is a little bit controversial. So this is the Paro baby seal robot that's used in nursing homes and with dementia patients. And it's very cute and makes these little movements and kind of responds to your touch, makes little sounds. And it gives people the sense of nurturing something, which is a little bit creepy when you think about the fact that they're not actually nurturing anything, but it has a really positive psychological effect on the patients, and they've even been able to use it as an effective alternative to medication for calming distressed patients, which is kind of awesome. Now, when I tell people about this robot, oftentimes the first response is, oh my gosh, Kate, that's terrible. I can't believe we're giving people robots instead of human care. And I think that's the correct response because I don't think we should be doing that. That is not how we should be using social robots to replace human care. They're terrible at human care. We should really leave that to the humans, but that's also not how this robot in particular is being used. The way they're trying to use this is as a replacement for animal therapy. And it works because people will consistently treat it more like an animal than a device, especially in these contexts where we can't use real animals because of safety or hygiene or other reasons. This can be a really powerful thing to explore. Now, that said, I do think that there are some concerns that we might have as we move into this era of human-robot interaction, especially as these devices come into more intimate areas of our homes and lives. There are the standard, security and data collection and privacy questions that come with, any device with microphones and cameras that come into people's homes. But there's an added element when you bring social robots into people's homes because social robots are really persuasive. They can be, manipulative even. If a robot can teach me how to learn French, what else can it persuade me to do? Can it persuade me to buy products and services or reveal more personal information than I would ever willingly enter into a company's database? Is it okay if my kid's French teaching robot has a vocabulary that's skewed towards specific products and services? That's a little on the nose. It would be more subtle than that, obviously. Is it okay if my sex robot has compelling in-app purchases? Or does that go too far? Is this something that consumer protection agencies are going to need to worry about sooner rather than later? And then there are some questions that we simply do not have answers to. So some of you may be familiar with this video that Boston Dynamics put out in 2015 introducing their robot named Spot, which is in both name and design very dog-inspired. It's older than the yellow one we saw earlier, but in this video, when they introduce Spot, they kick Spot. Once more, a little bit harder. So when people in robotics saw this video, everyone was like, it didn't fall over, that's amazing. And then some other people started expressing more negative emotions about what was happening in the video. And it got to the point where PETA, the animal rights organization, was getting a lot of phone calls from journalists. And they had to issue a press statement. And so some poor press person at PETA was like, okay, guys, we're not going to lose any sleep over this because it's not a real dog. But they also acknowledged that people might find the idea of this violence inappropriate. So I first got interested in this when I bought one of these. This is a Pleo. This is a toy that came out in 2007. I'm going to turn this on It takes a minute to warm up. This one is Mr. Spaghetti. I have 5 of them. But I bought this toy. It's so old now, and they don't make them anymore, which is really sad, but I still think it's a really compelling toy. It has all these motors and touch sensors. It has an infrared camera in the snout. Here we go. And they made it, try to mimic lifelike behavior as well as they could with the technology at the time. So one of the things it has is a tilt sensor. So it knows what direction it's facing. And when I first got it, I would show it off to my friends. And I would say, oh, hold it upside down. See what it does. Hold it up by the tail. Because this is what happens when you hold it up by the tail. If you can see. So I don't know if everyone can hear that, but it mimics being in distress really well. And what ended up happening was I would show it off to my friends and have them do this, and then some of them would hold it up a really long time, and it started to bother me. I'm going to turn Mr. Spaghetti off real quick because I'll turn him back on for Q&A, but he's going to be too distracting. Where's your button? Go to sleep. All right, there we go. It's one of those things where sometimes you don't know, they made it so that when it malfunctions, you're like, oh, it has a life of its own, and it causes you to suspend your disbelief even more. It's amazing. Okay, so I was weirded out by the fact that my friends would hold it up by the tail. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. First of all, I wasn't the most maternal person at the time. I did since have a baby, like I mentioned. I know that babies also squirm when you hold them upside down. But at the time, no, but I also knew exactly how the thing worked. I knew exactly how it worked, and I still felt compelled to comfort it when people held it upside down too long, which was really interesting to me, and it kind of sparked a curiosity. So fast forward a few years, and I did this workshop with my friend Hannes Gosselt. We were at a conference, and we took 5 of these baby dinosaur robots and made 5 groups of people, 6 people each, all adults. Every group got a dinosaur, and they had to name it and then play with it, interact with it. We had them do activities with it. And then after about 45 minutes, we unveiled a hammer and a hatchet, and we told them to torture and kill the robots. And it turned out to be more dramatic than we expected it to be. They all refused to do anything to them, which we thought at least some people would, but we finally had to improvise. So we were like, okay, you can save your team's robot if you hit another team's robot with a hammer. And I have some footage. It's not good and there's no sound, but you can see what's happening. So this woman has decided she's going to save her team's robot by hitting this. This is not her team's robot. She's going to hit it with this hammer. And she gave up. So that's how that went. And finally we had to be like, okay, we're going to destroy all the robots unless someone takes a hatchet to one of them. And this guy volunteered, and we kind of stood in a circle, and he brought the hatchet down on the robot. And then there was this half-joking, half-serious moment of silence in the room for the fallen robot, which was very interesting. It was just a really interesting day. Now, this wasn't science, of course. This was a workshop. There were social dynamics. People really got into it. But it inspired some later research that I did at MIT with Palash Nandi and Cynthia Brazil, where instead of using something really cute like the baby dinosaurs, we used hex bugs, which you might know this toy if you have kids. It moves around like an insect in a really lifelike way. And we had people come and smash them with mallets. And we were interested in, would they hesitate more if we gave the hexbug a name and personification? If we said, this is Frank. Frank's favorite color is red. He likes to play. And the other thing we wanted to know was whether their hesitation to hit them correlated with their natural tendencies for empathy. So we did psychological empathy testing with people, and we found that people who scored low on empathic concern, they didn't care about Frank. They would just hit Frank. And people who scored higher on empathic concern would hesitate more or even refuse to hit the hexbugs. So that was just a little study. It fits into a larger body of research looking at how people's tendencies for empathy relate to how they interact with robots. But the thing that's unanswered for me is the question, not the question, can we measure people's empathy using robots? We might be able to do that. But the thing I want to know is, can we change people's empathy using robots? So could we use robots therapeutically with prisoners or children or anyone really, the same ways that we try to use animal therapy to improve their behavior? Or on the flip side of this, could it be desensitizing to people if they're very violent towards lifelike robotic objects? There's already some anecdotal concern about children, like this study that noticed that kids would go and beat up this mall patrol robot that was patrolling the shopping mall. So when the kids were unsupervised, they would go and they would hit it over the head with bottles and yell at it. And the researchers ended up solving this by making the robot avoid people below a certain height and move towards taller people. But it raised the question of, if this is your kid, are there reasons to intervene and stop the kid from doing this that go beyond just respecting property or things? This guy wrote an article about how Amazon's Echo is turning his children into assholes because Alexa doesn't require please and thank you when you're demanding things. And in fact, there were so many complaints from parents to Amazon, and I think also the Google Home now too, that they released features that you can turn on where it will require you to say please and thank you. So we don't have research or evidence for this, but there's some anecdotal concern, particularly as the design of these technologies gets more lifelike. Could it be muddled in kids' subconscious? Could it be muddled in adults' subconscious? Is the problem not that if we teach the robots how to kick, that they come back and kick our asses? Is the problem that it does something to us when we kick the robots? We don't know. It's similar to the violence in video games question, but it's on a new level because of this visceral physicality that we have with these devices. So we don't know, is this a healthy outlet for violent behavior? Should we build Westworld? Is that cool? Is that good, healthy? Or is it training our cruelty muscles, like my friend once said? We have no idea. So for this reason, and for a lot of the reasons that I talked about today, technology integration, et cetera, I think that research in human-robot interaction is really important. And I also think it's really interesting because what's happening is we're learning more not just about robots and how to use them, but we're learning more about people, about human communication, human empathy, how we relate to others. And when I see a kid being nice to the robot vacuum cleaner, or a soldier risk their lives to save a robot that they work with, or a group of people just refuse to harm a robotic baby dinosaur, I don't see people being silly. I see people whose first instinct is to be kind. And to me, that's a much needed reminder of our own humanity. Thank you. So I think there are mics set up for questions if anyone has any. It's really hard to see. Where are the mics? Oh yeah, there's one. Any questions, anyone? Oh, it's hard for people to get out of their rows.
Hey.
Hey.
That presentation was kick-ass.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
So obviously I was thinking about all the amygdalas that were just frying holding up a robot and dangling. It's just like, oh, my heart, it just swooned. My, my first question for you is, can you tell us about one red line in robotics that you would not cross personally?
In robotics generally, like red line being like
One thing
that we shouldn't be doing with robots.
Correct.
I think that, well, for the most part, robotics is a platform technology, so it can be used for good and evil in that sense. You know, there's this saying in robotics, you know, there's a fine line between search and rescue and search and destroy, but there are some, you know, more specific use technologies. Like one thing I think is pretty problematic is automated weapon systems. Like I see no reason why we should have automated weapon systems. In fact, there are people trying to get them banned, get all of the UN countries to ban them. But you kind of need all of the countries to be on board with that for it to work. So it's been tough, but that's for me a red line, I think.
And then the second part of it is, tell me about a time that a robotic experience emotionally really hit you, like one really powerful moment.
That was actually recently. Well, aside from like the one that got me into all of this, I recently, this gonna sound like I'm a shill for Boston Dynamics, but so I got to visit Boston Dynamics, and I was always kind of skeptical of their, you know, videos because they're product videos, right? You don't know, oh, did the robot just not fall over this one time out of 60, and that's the video they're putting out. But I got to visit them earlier this year, and we walked in, and they have a humanoid robot called Atlas that was kind of just lying on the ground. And I was like, aha, it looks just like at MIT. None of the robots are working. And he just smiled at me and opened the door. And like we went into this room where there were just all these robots walking around just by themselves. And I was like, what is this? It was so weird and amazing to see. So I would say that was, it just, the future is going to be really weird.
Thank you very much.
Hi, nice presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Sophia?
So Sophia, I don't know if everyone's familiar, is this humanoid robot, looks like a woman, is often featured in the news, is a little bit overhyped, I would say, and somewhat of a PR stunt. Sophia, I find humanoid robots to be so boring. I get that we have this fascination with recreating ourselves, but why would we do that when we can create anything we want? And it also is a disappointing experience for people to interact with humanoid robots because they don't perform as well as we would like them to. You know, if you're talking to a robot that looks like a human, you're going to expect it to respond like a human, and the minute it doesn't, it disappoints your expectations and it breaks the illusion. So same thing with animal-like robots. Like this one works because no one's actually ever seen a baby Camarasaurus, so it's easy to imagine that this is kind of what that would be like. But we have a robot at home that's supposed to be a cat, and it like is furry like a cat, and it's just uncanny valley all the way. It's so creepy because it doesn't move exactly like a real cat, and so you're immediately like, oh, that's just a robot. So I find humanoid robots boring.
Thank you.
I really like the point of using animal companionship to analogous to how we use robotics for tools. Do you have a concern that downplays the security aspect of a compromised robot? It's much harder to detect until something goes horribly wrong, whereas a compromised animal is usually pretty easy to detect when something goes wrong?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So the way I've been thinking about it is in terms of animals having you can have an owner, you can have a trainer, you can have a handler, it can be all different people, and we have that with technology as well. But you are right that, a security flaw, like, you can tell when a dog has rabies. There's a lot more, maybe sinister or unintentional things that could be embedded inside of a robot that people don't immediately see. So yeah, I would have to think about that, because I am interested in finding the edges of this analogy and where it breaks down.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You talked about anthropomorphization of robots to animals. How do you feel about anthropomorphization of software? So think like Clippy in the future. Like, do people respond to that, and how do you feel about that?
Oh, they respond to it. I mean, there was a chatbot back in the, the 70s, created by Weissenbaum, called Eliza, that was it was modeled after, a psychotherapist that would just ask you questions. And it was very simple. People would totally open up to it and, tell it all of their secrets. And he ended up, writing a whole book about it, and ended up spawning the whole field of human-computer interaction, which looks at some of this. I think that, software and bots and Clippy, if Clippy were perhaps a little better designed, maybe I wouldn't hate Clippy so much. But yeah, I mean, people already do respond to that. For me, I like physical robots more, because there is a difference between something physical and something on a screen, but it is a whole spectrum. And, we relate to video game characters. People used to, did anyone used to play Portal? I feel like I'm really old. Yeah, some people, Portal. But like in the first Portal game, the last level, you have to incinerate this companion cube that's come with you throughout the whole game. And like, people would sacrifice themselves so they wouldn't have to incinerate the cube. So it's not restricted to physical robots, for sure.
But I do like that you're subconsciously petting
Yeah.
Mr. Spaghetti. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Is there someone waiting at the other mic? I just want to make sure that we're not. Oh, yes. Okay, let's take a question from the other side.
Sure. I was just wondering where you consider the line between a brain and a robot. Not necessarily even a human brain, but just the biological versus artificial brain.
I mean, I don't know that there's a line. It's just like, because I believe that in theory we can recreate, anything that we have, but I just don't think that we're even close to knowing how to do that. So not necessarily a line, just kind of a very long timeline. So, oh yeah, maybe, should we, we'll go here because the spotlight is here.
All right. Someone that deals with robots, what do you feel about the Turing test?
Oh, the Turing test is interesting. So did you want to explain what that is? Do you want me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so the Turing test is the idea that so say a chatbot can fool you into thinking that it's human, that could be a standard for artificial intelligence, right? As long as it can fool us into thinking that it's smart, it is smart. And so there are like some competitions where they have people try to pass the Turing test by having chatbots interact with human judges for a certain amount of time. And someone won one of these competitions a few years ago. But they won it in a really interesting way, I think, because it's so much about expectation management in, whether you can get someone to think that you're smart. They created a chatbot that was supposed to be like a 13 or 14-year-old boy from the Ukraine, which, of course, you're going to have very different standards and expectations when you're interacting with that type of chatbot than with a chatbot that's pretending to be, someone from your country who's like your same age. And so similar to the design of these robots, there's so much that we can do with chatbots and with AI generally that has so much to do with managing people's expectations and tricking people into thinking that it's smart, that I wonder whether the Turing test is really even what we should still be focusing on.
Thank you.
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time, but thank you so much. This was a blast. All right, thanks.
Everyone's leaving? You didn't want to stick around to see me and Jeff?
They-
Come on, what are we, chopped liver?
They can still keep going in there. They're going in the right direction.
Here, wait, Jeff has a button.
Way to do it.
Uh,
Oh,
You're supposed to turn off. Or that, or do that.
trying to set me up for trouble. What?
Well, okay, I've got a
Yes.
question though. How many of you went like, when they kicked Spot? Because I definitely did. I was like, and then when they kicked him hard, I was like, oh! And I also say thank you and please to Alexa, and it usually messes up what I'm asking her to do. So,
Yeah, you got a little squeamish when they had Mr. Spaghetti.
oh, I did
hanging.
not like it.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Yeah, that was.
I
I
guess
was like, wow, she's right. I'm watching it happen.
I think I care more for robots than people, though.
Yes. The moral of the story is, you got to stop freaking kicking me.
Oh, hey, you know,
Stop.
you're stiff. You're
Yeah.
like this. You're like a robot
I
sometimes.
just thought, never mind. All right.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, this is
Good. You guys are leaving, but it's all
good.
good.
Good thing half the
We
room
have
left. But for our
two
captive
parties, right?
audience,
We have
yes,
two parties
we have
gotta
two
attend.
parties.
Yes. First party is going to be happening right there. That's our friends at Scale Computing, right? 4:45. That's going to be the pregame.
You hit the
happy
button
hour.
on that key messaging.
I did.
That's the
yes.
pregame.
Yes. And then what's the next one?
Oh, we've got our Spice World Party deep in the heart of Texas. That's in partnership with T-Mobile Business. T-Mobile for Business?
Yes.
Yeah, at
That is
ACL
correct.
Moody Theater at 6 p.m. So for you veterans, you're usually used to a 7-Eleven timeline. It's actually 6 to 10 tonight. So we're going to get our drink on earlier, and then we're going to get even more of our drink on even earlier, and then we're going to get out to the after parties, and then the after parties even earlier.
Yes.
So we've got so much time. We've
We
got a
do.
lot of time.
Yes. Don't drink too much. I don't want you kicking me. More dancing, less kicking. Can we do that?
Oh, you want to do another
Yes.
do-si-do? Okay,
Do that.
let's come
All
on.
right.
See, I told you.
Yeah,
he's
we're gonna
got
end
no
on that
rhythm.
note. Thank you very much.
All
Thank you
right.
again to Tate Darling, and we'll see you
Yes.
guys. Enjoy the rest of Spice World.
See you tomorrow or later. Bye.